Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel, and in this video I have my starts of the week for week 2 of the 2023 fantasy football season. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's get right into it. We're going to start with the quarterback position, and my first quarterback start is Trevor Lawrence, quarterback of the Jacksonville Jags. You're probably playing him already, but I just wanted to talk about him in this video because week 1 was good and not great. 18.7 points according to Fantasy Pro scoring. But I think week 2 is going to be even better. Last week in week 1, I had Trevor Lawrence in the game and Tua on the bench in my dynasty team. Obviously, Tua was the #1 quarterback on the week, and I believe I did lose as a result of that. I made a number of mistakes, but long story short, I am still keeping Trevor Lawrence in my lineup for week 2. They get a matchup against the Chiefs. It is a high over-under. I expect it to be an offensive explosion back and forth. We know the Chiefs are going to put up points, and I think Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars are going to hang right there with the Chiefs, so fire them up with confidence in week 2. My next start of the week is Jared Goff, quarterback of the Detroit Lions. Week 1 wasn't as electric of a performance as I was hoping in terms of fantasy, but that was just a great game, and I think in week 2 we see a little bit more of offensive fireworks. As you can see in 2022, Jared Goff had quite the career resurgence. If you just take a quick look at his quarterback finishes, he had 8, 1, 4, 4, 2, 7. He had some big games, and he was just pretty solid for fantasy, a great streaming option, especially at home. He performed much better for fantasy, and that's where he is playing in week 2 against the Seattle Seahawks. If you look at their matchup last season, he was a quarterback 1 on the week, had 34.2 points for this scoring format that Fantasy Pros uses. 378 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick. Just a great performance. I'm not calling for a quarterback 1 finish on the week, but that is just to say that this matchup does have a lot of potential. The Seahawks offensive line is a little banged up, so hopefully the Seahawks can keep up with the Lions offense, so it's a bit of a back and forth, but either way, I like Jared Goff as a nice lower end quarterback 1 with some upside. Next up at quarterback, we got Justin Fields, QB of the Chicago Bears. Week 1 wasn't great for fantasy or for the eye test. I did watch that game, but in week 2, he's taking on the Tampa Bay Bucks. I think that is a matchup that can be exposed, and in week 1, he still had 59 yards. So that definitely shows that he has that floor of rushing yards. And I believe he only had a couple designed runs. I think if the coaching staff is smart, they'll get him more involved in the rushing game with some designed carries. And I think that it'll be a get-right game for DJ Moore. I think we'll see a little bit better of a performance in week 2. And if you look at how he finished the season last year, from week 6 on, he was a quarterback 8, 5, 5, 1, 1, 7. Missed the game 5, 7, 25 against the Buffalo Bills, and then 10. So just based off of one game, don't forget the type of upside that this guy has. They added DJ Moore to the offense. I think at some point it's going to click, and you don't want him to be on your bench when it does. So I really like Justin Fields to bounce back, for fantasy at least, in week 2. I don't think the Bears are going to win, though, because the Buccaneers are going to win this game on the back of Baker Mayfield. He's got Mike Evans. He's got Chris Godwin, who we may or may not be talking about later. In his first game against my Minnesota Vikings, I was there at the game in real life in attendance, and we did lose. It's not like Baker Mayfield lit the world on fire, but he had a couple passing touchdowns. He was a quarterback 13 on the week, it looks like. So I'm not saying firing him up as like a confident top-end quarterback 1, but if you're in a 2-quarterback league and you need a second QB, I do like this matchup with the Chicago Bears. Or if you're streaming the position and you have a bunch of people in your league that have like 2 quarterbacks on their roster for some reason, I think Baker Mayfield can kind of exploit this matchup against the Bears, who we just saw Jordan Love destroy them. And there were questions about what's Jordan Love? Is he going to be good? In week 1, he looked good against this very defense. So I'm expecting similar results from Baker Mayfield. We're going to move on to the running back position, and I am calling it Jahmyr Gibbs. This is his breakout game. He's a start of the week for me. They said he's going to get more touches. In week 1, he only had 7 rushing attempts, only 2 targets. It turned into 7 fantasy points at half PPR. Not what we expected at all. If you can buy low on Jahmyr Gibbs, I would highly recommend doing it. I think he's going to be a solid higher-end RB2 with much more potential depending on his total volume and passing game involvement. In one of my leagues, he's currently on the bench of a team in our league, in one of my leagues for some reason, and I am doing everything I can to try to acquire Gibbs on my team because I think this is the week where he sees a volume increase. Maybe it's not the full potential of the volume that we'll see later on in the season, but I do think his touches go up. And this game has the potential to be high scoring if Seattle's offense can click. But either way, I think the Lions are going to be putting up a ton of points in this game. And I think Gibbs is going to be one of the beneficiaries of their offense. So I really like Jahmyr Gibbs this week, playing with confidence. And listen, guys, I know it's gross, but my next running back start of the week is Zack Moss, running back of the Indianapolis Colts. All I know is that they're playing the Houston Texans, and he is going to be the unquestioned lead running back for the Colts, just with no Jonathan Taylor and just what the mess of running backs they got going on there. He should be the clear back. Last year, against the same Texans defense, he was the running back 2 on the week. Had 114 yards on 18 carries, a touchdown. I think he is going to have enough volume, and it's a great matchup where he's going to be a solid play. Throw him in your flex if you're desperate at running back. Don't play him over those top elite options, but I do think that he is going to have a good game for fantasy. And even in week 1, the Houston Texans gave up points to the Baltimore Ravens on the ground. I don't think their defense is really improved. I think they're going to be bad again this year, so I like Zack Moss. My final start of the week at the running back position is Tyler Allgeier, and in these videos, I try to give you some more under-the-radar guys. Obviously, I would play Bijan Robinson, his teammate, over him, but I think if you drafted him late, like I did in a league, or maybe 2, I think just 1, I thought that he had the potential to kind of carve out his own role on the team, even with Bijan there, and he saw 15 carries and 3 targets. It turned into 75 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. It turned into 3 for 19 through the air. I don't think he's going to get in the end zone twice and be a top 5 running back again, but I do think you can stream Allgeier as an RB3 or a flex option. I think this will be a competitive game with the Packers, and I think the Falcons will be able to have some success on the ground, and even if they don't have success, they're going to just keep feeding those running backs. We might see Bijan eventually get more of the workload. Whether that happens this week or later on in the season, who knows? But I think a good amount of volume will be there for Allgeier, and the matchup doesn't really scare me. I think it'll be competitive. I like Tyler Allgeier in week 2. We're going to move on to the wide receiver position, and I'm calling for a Cincinnati Bengals bounce back. I'm starting Joe Burrow, starting Ja'Marr Chase, starting Joe Mixon, and we're going to talk about T. Higgins. I would fire him up with confidence in week 2. In that same league that I talked about Jahmyr Gibbs in, where Gibbs is on the bench, T. Higgins is also on the bench. I know he goosed in week 1, but listen, it's a fluke. It was a fluke. Higgins is a great player. He has been for years. He's going to bounce back. He's going to be a wide receiver 2 each and every week for your team with insane upside. You do not want to miss the game where he goes off, because he can have games like that, okay? And he often puts up good numbers for fantasy, okay? That's why he got drafted where he did. That's why he's good for fantasy. That's why he's a good player, and that's why you should start him in week 2. Don't bench T. Higgins unless your wide receiver core is just like otherworldly. Like you literally have like Adams, Diggs, and Jefferson somehow. You know what I mean? If you got, if it's something like that somehow, then great. Don't play Higgins. But if you have a normal team where you're playing elite players, play T. Higgins. He's going to bounce back. Next up, we're going to go with Zay Jones, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jags. I'm going to kind of stack him with my quarterback start with Trevor Lawrence. And obviously you're starting Calvin Ridley in this game. But Zay Jones is the second option in that wide receiver room. Don't play Christian Kirk. I mean, you could in a pinch, but based on the metrics of who's more involved, who's more likely to see targets, who's on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, Zay Jones, at least based on week 1, is the guy that you want. Finished with 5 receptions on 7 targets for 55 yards and a touchdown, 14 points in half PPR. He was a wide receiver finish. He was the wide receiver 18 on the week, which is a wide receiver 2. And don't forget, last year, down the stretch, he was a somewhat reliable fantasy option. Obviously not an alpha number 1, but someone you could play as a wide receiver 3 or 4 or in a flex. I would fire him up. You can see he had a wide receiver 5, 8, 1. There was some, not great performances in there as well. But when you're in this range of player, he's not going to be a week in, week out top wide receiver 1, because first of all, most wide receivers don't do that. Most wide receivers have inconsistencies. And second of all, he'd be, drafted where Calvin Ridley was. He's a wide receiver 2. I like him as a nice little flex play in your lineup. He is the wide receiver 2 for Trevor Lawrence in a game that I think there will be a lot of points. So take a shot if you need to take a shot on a guy in a flex or something like that. Next up, I'm going to talk about 2 players. The first one is Keenan Allen, wide receiver of the LA Chargers. And the second one is Mike Williams, wide receiver, also of the LA Chargers. Keenan Allen, you're probably starting no matter what. 6 targets, 6 receptions on 9 targets for 76 yards in week 1. He's very involved. He's going to continue to be involved. And then Mike Williams, I would also start, not as confidently as Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is pretty much an auto start. Mike Williams, I like him as like a wide receiver 2 or flex, but he has a ton of upside. He has big game ability. He did not show it in week 1, surprisingly, because, there were a lot of points, but he went 4 for 45, no touchdowns, not a great week, 6.5 points in fantasy. I think in week 2, though, he does have a chance to put up a big game. It's hard to, predict those things. It's hard to guarantee, but I do think if there was a game where he could go off, that he is set up really well in this game. The Tennessee Titans last year were a amazing matchup for wide receivers because not only could you throw on them, but it was tough to run on them, okay? And in week 1, the Saints were not very efficient on the ground against this same Titans defense that they played last week, but Derek Carr was able to exploit kind of that secondary. Chris Olave got loose, Shaheed, Michael Thomas. They all had, good to great games for fantasy. And in week 2, Austin Eckler, star running back of the Chargers, has already been ruled out for the game. So that doesn't mean they're going to abandon the run, but that just means, hey, there might be more targets that go to Williams and Keenan Allen. We might see them aired out a little bit. And because, don't forget, Austin Eckler, he himself commands targets. And I think those have to go somewhere, and they probably won't all go to the running back replacements. So I think Mike Williams, I would play him. Not a must start, but he's someone where if you don't play him, I could definitely see a scenario where you're like, man, I could have just easily won my week if he was in my lineup. Because if he goes off, which he can, it could be big in this matchup. So fire him up. We are going to go with another duo for my start of the week at the wide receiver position. The first one is Mike Evans, and the second one is Chris Godwin, both wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Bucks. And this is why I like Baker Mayfield. He's got these 2 really awesome wide receivers. Mike Evans last week against my Vikings had a slow first half, but in the second half, he was 6 for 66 on 10 targets. Or I should say, in the second half, he picked it up, and for the game, he was 6 for 66, got in the end zone, finished as the wide receiver 13, almost a wide receiver 1, 15.6 points. And then Chris Godwin, not an elite game, but 5 receptions on 6 targets for 51 yards, only 7.6 points. Not an eye-popping number, but he had a fair share of targets. You'd hope for a few more. But 51 yards is, any good wide receiver on any day could go out and put up, 50 yards and not have an elite day. Godwin and Evans are not quite at that tier where you're starting them each and every week, no matter what. But you have to have a pretty good receiving core to consider benching these guys, especially in a matchup against the Bears. I just don't think the Bears are a great team. The Packers dismantled them in the passing game. We saw rookie tight end Luke Musgrave getting loose for multiple long plays. I know one of them was a miss, just a missed completion, but there was a lot of opportunity there. And I just think that these targets for the Buccaneers are so consolidated to 2 people with Evans and Godwin. I think that each week you can be pretty confident that they're going to see at least a healthy target share. And in week 1, at least, they could not run the ball very well against my Vikings. Maybe they'll be able to run on the Bears. Certainly the Packers were. Aaron Jones was, so who knows? Maybe they'll run the ball. But I think there is potential for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to turn in solid wide receiver 2 performances in week 2. And my tight end start of the week is Hunter Henry, also known as the tight end 1 on the week for week 1 with 14.1 points. It was a down week for tight ends, but if you're streaming your tight end position, you want to pick someone up, Hunter Henry's a good option. He's no Travis Kelce, but no one really is. I do like him a lot as a low tight end 1 in week 2. Last year, the Dolphins were a good matchup for tight ends. In week 1 against the Chargers, we did see a lot of production go to the tight end position as well. I made Gerald Everett a start of the week for last week, and it just turned out that a different tight end, I think it was Parham or somebody, got a touchdown against this same Miami Dolphins defense. So that was, the process was right where I said I like Gerald Everett because I like the tight end position against the Dolphins, but it was just the wrong player. So especially with the revenge game narrative that Mike Gesicki offers, former Miami Dolphin, maybe Gesicki gets in the end zone, or maybe neither do. But Mac Jones, they put up points on this Eagles defense last week, and I think Mac Jones put up points against the Eagles defense in week 1. We saw the Chargers put up points against the Dolphins in week 1. I think this has sneaky high scoring upside, and I do think the Patriots can put up points, and I think Hunter Henry has a decent chance to be a part of that, hopefully get in the end zone. He's a low tight end 1 who I think he's a decent bet to get in the end zone in week 2. As far as you can go with this tier of player, I wouldn't be shocked if he got in the end zone. So I like him as a nice streamer. And that's going to do it for my starts of the week for week 2 of the 2023 fantasy football season. Please make sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to you guys later. Peace out.